Thank you, Chris. Oh, hi everyone. How are you all doing today? Enjoyed the conference so far. My name is Annika Craine. I am the Industry Relations Manager at the Music Managers Forum, the MMF, and I am joined by Ommanney-Terry.
Hello, how are you doing?
The European Development Advisor at beatBread. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
I have my trusty questions in front of me in case I forget how to speak English. But Mark, let's begin. Could you tell us a bit about your background in the music industry and your history with the labels over the years?
Well, my history is that I've worked in major labels for my sins for the last 30 years. I started in about 1986. I worked for Madonna's PR as her assistant, which was a baptism of fire, and have kind of meandered my way through the industry. I've done PR, marketing, international. For my sins again, I had the joy of marketing Spice Girls all the way through to the Rolling Stones. So it's a fairly deep amount of experience in terms of what you come across every day, the kind of rosters that you're dealing with, the artists that you're dealing with. I've worked at Warner's. I spent 20 years working at Virgin in lots of different capacities. I moved to EMI when EMI bought Virgin and ran the EMI labels for Terra Firma, and then went to Atlantic for a couple of years to run Atlantic, and my last role was running Columbia as the president of Columbia.
Amazing. That's quite a breadth and depth of experience you've got there. So we've seen changes to deals over the last 15 years or so. What do you think has been the biggest shift in that?
I'm not sure there have been massive changes, actually. I think the deals, if you read them, the contracts are fairly similar. They've got different tones to them. Digital has obviously become a bit more of a thing, but that hasn't changed the deals too much. I think what has changed massively is perceptions about deals, and particularly artist perceptions about deals. I think if you go into any major record company these days, the one thing that the A&R team will bemoan is that they struggle to get artists to do deals. And that in my mind is a great thing, because artists going in to do deals where they're not truly aware of what those deals mean and how they can influence them and affect their earnings, affect their rights, is a bad thing. So I think people are far more astute than they've ever been.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good point. On that, you know, you've shifted from all of that, you're now working with beatBread. Could you tell us a bit more about what beatBread do, and also what was your appeal to joining the team?
Well, after Columbia, I joined a VC, and my remit there was to look at progressive, digitally based companies that we could acquire. And there were loads of companies out there. There's lots of companies out there doing amazing things, helping creativity, helping artists, helping to get some clarity in the industry. But there are a few that are really kind of moving things on and changing the game. And one of them was beatBread. And that was my first real introduction to them and what they were doing. And it was a very simple solution to an age-old problem. And that was that they were funding artists. They were giving them the ability to draw down on advances from future earnings and to invest it as they wanted to in their careers. It didn't tie them to any rights. They weren't having to give up their rights, but they could do a 1, 2, 3, 5, or 8 year deal, take some money, and then invest it in their career. So they could put a band together, they could get in a musical director, they could make a video, or they could buy themselves out of a major deal, which one of them already has. And it just seemed like an amazing leap forward, a huge progression in terms of being able to give artists freedom and flexibility to be in the industry, not just through a major, but to do it their way. And lots of artists want to do that these days.
Okay, so, you know, the industry is changing, ever changing. Would you say that the work that beatBread is doing is reflective of that change? Or do you think potentially beatBread is blowing up the industry model?
I mean, they're definitely not blowing it up. You know, the majors do an amazing job. You know, the analogy that we tend to use is that from 50 to 100 miles an hour, you can't be a major. If you want to take Ed Sheeran and you want to blow him up globally, you need to be with a major. It's very difficult to do that otherwise. From 30 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour, they're pretty good. But in terms of 0 to 30, no one's very good at that anymore because the whole industry's been turned on its head. You know, the days of walking into Radio 1 with a record at 10 o'clock in the morning and having it hit by 4 o'clock in the afternoon are long gone. You know, the industry aren't the gatekeepers anymore. You know, fans are actually making those decisions, and the industry's now looking to the fans to tell them what's hot and what's not. So there will always be a place for major deals, and artists will hopefully be able to enter into those deals in a far more equitable way. I think all that beatBread are doing really is giving them the ability to control when that happens, if it happens, and you know, having funds to make a video so that you can be more prolific online is key to this. So I think that they're just basically making the whole thing a lot fairer.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. With that, tell us about a success you've seen so far in this model.
I mean, I think beatBread's biggest success is the fact that they just managed to get cash into artist accounts, to be honest. But there's two ends of the spectrum. I mean, we've had artists that have taken money, invested them in videos, and then, you know, this particular artist went on to do a major deal with Warner's. And it was the ability to make that video and get themselves better known that gave them the flexibility to do that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we've had an artist that took the biggest advance. I mean, we can advance anywhere from $1,000 to $2 million. But they took the biggest advance that we've done so far, and they bought themselves out of a major deal. They didn't feel comfortable in the deal, and they wanted to go their own way. So I think that in itself is a success. When you're giving artists the ability to make choice, I think that's got to be successful.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful balance, and it's also a very personal thing for the artist, you know, which way they want to go. One of the things about labels is that, you know, is there not still a lot of cachet about signing, you know, at a label deal, and to expect artists to run their career by themselves without the big machine might be asking them a lot, given everything we're already asking them. So with that, you know, what do you think about the fact that this model, though it's fantastic, might be asking a lot from the artists, and they might not always have the resources or kind of even the mental capacity to do so?
They're being asked a lot anyway. I mean, if you get an artist coming through the door, signing a major deal, and they sign the deal and then turn to you and say, okay, what are you going to do for me now? You're in trouble. You know, record labels expect artists to work their own careers. And now it's that process is taking longer and longer. So artists are having to get themselves from 0 to 30 miles an hour, even 50 miles an hour, before a label turns up. And that takes a good manager. It takes determination, making the right content, driving your audience, building it. And there is still cachet in a major deal, but the reality of a major deal is it's a very small percentage of artists that sign a major deal and get global success. You know, it's difficult to break in a domestic market, let alone to break globally. So it's a tiny percentage, and a lot of artists enter into deals imagining that's going to be the end game. And the reality is quite different. And in the process, they sign away their rights. They take a 20% royalty while the label takes 80%, and they're generally drowning in debt for the rest of their time with the label. So majors are never going to go away. Those deals are a huge part of the music economy, but there's this whole other economy that's happening with creators, and there's hundreds of thousands of artists around the world that are never going to get record deals, don't want to get record deals, but are still generating a lot of money and driving their own business.
And with those artists who don't want to get major record deals, but they want to become global successes, is there scope with organizations such as beatBread and other ways of working independently to become a global success still? Or do you think that you still always need to rely on the major to really reach that global scale?
I mean, there are good examples of that happening recently. I mean, Stormzy ran his own career for years before he signed a deal with Atlantic. And when he came to do that deal, it was a far more equitable deal. It was a licensing deal rather than a standard record deal. And I think that's generally Georgia Smith's another one. You know, that's generally what's happening. You know, I manage an artist at the moment, and he's kind of been coached a little bit in this regard, but the last thing he wants to do is sign a record deal at the moment. We've just signed a publishing deal, but he doesn't want to commit himself to signing his rights away. And my experience of younger artists is that's becoming increasingly common.
So given innovation, rapidly developing technology that we've all learned about today and that we're going to continue learning about, where do you see label deals and the label's influence on the wider music industry in, let's say, 5 years' time?
I'd like to think they'd be a bit more equitable. I think they'll probably remain exactly the same. But I think labels will change. I think they have to change. I think they'll seem maybe more as financiers than they are currently. And that's mainly because of the up-and-coming new artists. They want to have control of their careers. They want to have control of their creative output. And, that's becoming increasingly important to them. They're turning into more business-centric artists. So, yeah.
And to add to that, how do you see the competition for signing artists change over the next 5 years as well?
My sense is that actually the majors in particular are becoming far more selective. And that's a bit of a problem. I mean, I personally think that music at the moment feels quite homogenized. I think that's a lot to do with streaming and click rates. And the majors are being very driven in particular by what they're seeing happening online and not particularly taking risks. We broke George Ezra a few years ago, and we built him from the ground up. No one knew about him when he was signed. And we stuck with him for 2 years before we got to a point where he actually broke. And that's happening less and less. Majors are spending a lot of time focusing on hits, so the industry is becoming a lot more hit-driven. If you have a global hit around the world, it's financially far more lucrative than selling 300,000 a platinum album in the UK. So if you can find that hit, get on it early, the investment's less, and you can make a lot of money. So it's just a changing business, and it's going to keep on evolving. What I think is healthy about it is that you do have this tidal wave of creativity with young artists that are coming through, and they're not reliant on a record company picking them up and selling them to a radio station, the radio station supporting them, and that being the way through to the audience. The audience are finding them for themselves now, and I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and to end it and to add to that on a positive and exciting note, what are you most excited about when you look at the industry today?
I think the fact that there is this whole new economy coming that is not dependent on a gatekeeper. I always go back to David Bowie, Prince. If they were being signed today, would they make it? And I think the reality is that they probably wouldn't. And I think there has to come a point where that isn't the case. And you have to support artists like that. It took Prince 4 or 5 albums before he broke. He had to really slug it out, and that's the reality. Being in the music business is really tough if you're an artist, and you just have to stick with it. And you do need support, and if someone can come along, an organization like beatBread can supply you with money so that you can actually invest in your own career, that has to be a good thing.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
I think